Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading another textbook, cover to cover. Here in this 1940 Catholic school American history textbook from 1940, we're on Chapter 3, Section 6. The English Colonies, Life and Work in New England. Homes and home life. The houses of New England were made of wood. Logs were used at first. Later, sawmills were set up on the banks of the swift-flowing streams. Now logs could be sawed and made into planks. Heavy timber for house frames, boards for siding, and shingles for roofs were also cut from logs. The settlers were now able to build fine frame houses. Most of the colonial frame houses built in New England were almost square. A large fireplace was built so that the house could be heated. Wood was the fuel burned in the fireplace. A large chimney carried off the smoke from the burning wood. Most of the houses built in the early days were 1 story high. Later colonial homes were 2 stories high and commonly built. The roof of the New England colonial house was built steep rather than this. Was built steep. This was done so that the rain and snow would easily run off. Windows were small to keep out the cold. Glass was very scarce because it had to be brought from England. Oiled paper was often used on the windows. The oiled paper let in the light and kept out the wind. It was difficult to see through the oiled paper, so it was not entirely satisfactory for windows. Oiled paper. That's interesting. The oiled paper let the light and kept out the wind, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes a deer skin was stretched across the window. The deer skin kept out the cold but did not let in much light. Wooden shutters were put in on the windows for wintertime to keep out the cold. Shutters on the windows could be removed. The early settlers in New England suffered greatly during the cold winters. They were not used to winters that were so severe coming from England. Occupations. Most of the people who settled in New England were farmers. Their farms were small. These New England farmers worked very hard. The land was filled with stones. The stones had to be cleared from the ground before crops could be planted. The farmers used stones to build foundations for their houses and to build fences. Many of these early stone fences may be seen today in New England. The farmers raised corn, grain, beans, and pumpkins. Often the people did not live on the farms. They lived in villages. They went out each day to work in the fields. The homes of the village were often built around an open space. This space was called the village green. Every village had a blacksmith. His chief task was to put shoes on the hooves of horses. He made many useful iron articles, iron pots and kettles for cooking, and irons for the fireplace, and tools for the farmer were made in the blacksmith's shop. It was indeed a busy place. Skilled carpenters took charge of the building of the houses. Settlers who lived near the sea became fishermen or shipbuilders. Some of the people who lived near the sea became sailors or sea captains. Then there were the lumbermen who went out into the forest to cut trees. Some of the early settlers became fur trappers or fur traders. Shoes were made by cobblers. The women and girls spun thread and yarn. They wove both linen and woolen cloth. Of course, the women and girls made the clothing. Of course, it says here. 1940. Butter and cheese, candles, brooms, and furniture were often made in the homes. There was plenty of work to do. The New England colonists were hard-working people. The church and the people. The church was usually the largest building in the village. The colonists considered the church a meeting house. It was an important place. The church was supported by taxes. Persons who failed to attend church were subject to a fine. The minister or the preacher was usually the most important man in the settlement. He preached at the morning services and again at the afternoon services on Sundays. The people sat on hard wooden benches. The men and boys sat on one side of the church. The women and girls were seated on opposite sides. Often the services were very long. A man was appointed to keep the boys and even the men awake. Then he merely had to tickle a sleeper to awaken him. The schools, how weird. The schools of people in New England believed in education. The people of New England believed in education. They insisted that their children have schools. The church or meeting house was often used as a school. Some villages had a separate one-room school building. The minister often was a school master. The children were taught to read and write and to do some simple arithmetic. There were few books in the New England colonial schools. Usually the children learned their lessons from a single page. This page was framed between two pieces of thin horn. I don't know what that means. This kept the page clean and helped it to make it last a long time. Okay. Such a page was very valuable. It was often called a horn book, although it was only one page. Lessons were taught from the Protestant Catechism, a book with questions and answers on the teachings of Christian religion is called a catechism. The school term was short. The schools were closed when the boys and girls needed to work. Boys and girls helped with planting and harvesting of crops. Amusements. Games and sports which were common in the South were not common in New England. Card playing was popular in the South, but card playing was not allowed in New England. The colonists in the South were fond of dancing, but dancing was not permitted in New England colonies. Really? Drill exercises were looked upon as real sport. It was taught to be a fun drill as soldiers. Games as we know them were rare. Boys did have marbles to play with, and girls did have dolls. The dolls were homemade, but the girls enjoyed playing with them. Toys were very scarce. Bye-bye.